notion of security that includes feminist perspective would be defined as human security that takes into account a lot of other variables as well. Human rights, socioeconomic gaps in society, minority rights, and more civil points of view in general. As part of the difference between the components of the notion of security, the way security is defined will necessarily define who can be part of the security discourse. This means that if we have a narrow notion of security, mostly high-ranking army men can be part of this discussion. In Israel, the narrow notion of security, as defined above, remains prevalent. This can be seen, for example, in the construction of decision-making bodies, which are dominated mainly by men. It appears in the allocation of governmental resources, with a significant and disproportionate budget allocated to welfare system, and lack of women in mainstream media, especially in times of crisis. Thus, we can see that the discourse remains largely dominated by a militaristic point of view, neglecting advocate civil points of view. In light of these discursive realities, during our effort to formulate the civil action plan with women's NGOs, we defined our main vision. It stipulated that first we must redefine the notion of security by including all components that we believe need to be part of what security means. We acknowledge that until this redefined notion is implemented, 3025 principles can be fully adopted. The redefinition of security that we have proposed state as follows. Try to see the PowerPoint. Excuse me. Okay, so take a breath. This is a very long definition.
Oh, okay.
A broad one. Security for the people of Israel is a broad concept which includes the following: protection from violence in public and private spaces, termination of the ongoing states of warfare, defense and advancement of political, civil, and economic rights, freedom from religious coercion, freedom from oppression born of denial of personal and collective rights, freedom from violence, death, and destruction of innocent people, and equal opportunities for women from all parts of society in the economic, education, employment, health, and housing spheres. Moreover, the action plan is based on the definition of security, which includes a peaceful resolution of the conflict, the establishment of agreed upon national borders, withdrawal from occupied territories, prevention of future violent conflict, and the establishment of stable and enduring peace. This broad definition reflects our vision and acts as the foundation of our subsequent work. In addition, this definition of security was a collaborative effort, allowing each organization to express its fundamental values, thereby serving as an important key to gathering and uniting so many women's NGOs. Nevertheless, we had a few dilemmas and challenges with this definition. First, while acknowledging the importance of broadening the notion of security by emphasizing human rights and socio-economic aspects, we were aware of the possibility that emphasizing these components could exacerbate the stereotype regarding women and security, and the fact that women are excluded from the real discourse on security. In fact, it seemed to be an endless circle that we had to face. However, we decided that in order to change the discourse, we had to confront these stereotypes, stating that these components constitute security for all of the society and not just for women. Another challenge lies in the fact that security discourse is so central in Israel that everything is linked to security. For example, some women's organization representatives define the unequal salaries between men and women as a lack of security. We were concerned that such a generalized definition of security could void it of its meaning. Therefore, we felt that we must border the discourse in some way. Finally, we needed to formulate our statement regarding the classic notion of security, especially regarding women in the army. In many countries, the interpretation of 3025 translated to advancing women into high-ranking position in the army. We felt that in a broad definition of security, the army cannot be viewed as a key to mobilizing women into civil discourse on security, and is not the relevant arena to advance neither peace nor gender perspectives. Hence, we decided not to include this demand in our action. Challenge number 2, if it's not heavy enough. Inclusion of diverse voices and identities in decision-making discourse. There is a famous story regarding the negotiation in Darfur in 2006. During this negotiation, the peace talk ran into difficulties while discussing the distribution of reservoir. After days of disagreement, a local women's organization joined the table and immediately solved the problem.
Where was this
How?
again? Where
Darfur.
Darfur.
How they did it? By unveiling to all the men negotiating that there is no longer water in this river. So this example is so simple, maybe too simple, in order to exemplify the fact that local and diverse women bring an added value to the table. In the Israeli reality, the challenge is to include the women that are not part of the hegemonic groups. This means to advance Arab women, ultra-Orthodox Jewish women, and other marginalized groups of women. Accordingly, this is the definition of diversity in our action plan. And again, it's not going to be short. The integration of women from all sectors of the population, as the law states, relate to incorporation of representatives of all age groups, including Orthodox Jewish religious women, Mizrahi women, Arab women, Muslim, Christian, Druze, and Bedouin, religious and secular, Ashkenazi women, women of all sexual orientation, heterosexual, bisexual, lesbian, transsexual, queer, women of Ethiopian descent, Russian-speaking women, women with disability, migrant workers, asylum seekers, as well as additional groups not specifically mentioned here. The requirement for varied representation carries with it implicit recognition of the fact that there are still groups suffering from discrimination which have yet to be recognized. As part of attaining the goal of achieving truly diverse representation, it is necessary to continue at all times to seek out and identify additional social groups whose right to be represented in decision-making bodies as not being recognized or acted upon. Okay, sorry. While advancing diverse representation as it appears in this definition, we faced a few more dilemmas. First was our desire to avoid exceptionalism, which means not to expect one woman to represent her entire community's needs. Although I must share with you that one of our petitions in 2011 caused the Prime Minister to appoint an Arab woman for the first time to a governmental committee, which was a good step. Reading the protocol of this committee can exemplify the fact that the Arab woman that was appointed brought perspectives that are highly relevant to the Arab society that probably would be lacking without it. However, we strive for a reality more than one woman to represent each group, not placing on one woman's shoulders a whole group's affiliation. Another challenge is the effort to diversify perspectives, not necessarily by amplifying their added value. And here I would like to explain what I mean. Our first petition to the Supreme Court was challenging the governmental committee that was appointed to examine the Bedouin settlement in the Negev. We believe that one Jewish woman among 8 committee members is not proper representation and obviously not diverse one. In our petition, we described the damage that could be caused by lack of Bedouin women in this committee and accordingly demand to appoint Bedouin women to the committee. However, we were aware of the fact that pointing out the explicit potential damage could be helpful in the short term in this petition, but problematic in the long term. As to the fact that women, especially of marginalized groups, constantly need to reaffirm their relevance to decision-making forums, describing what they bring to the table and the potential harm of excluding them. In the case of the Bedouin settlement, we can easily point out the damage, but how can we point out the link between marginalized women and peace talks? Here, sorry, I don't have the rest, so I need to go to my computer, sorry for that. Sorry. This added value of diverse representation should be considered as an axiom without the need to justify its relevance, and this is something that we strive to achieve. Challenge number 3. Use of legal tool to implement 3025. As lawyers, we usually tend to believe that the law is everything. And sometimes it is. Yeah? Indeed, the legislation in Israel is an effective tool for advancing the implementation of 3025, and more specifically for framing diverse representation as obligatory. As such, courts play an important role in hearing our petitions against governmental committees in breach of the law. This was the case when the Supreme Court severely criticized the government for its lack of women in the Turkey Committee, which was appointed to examine the Turkish flotilla aimed to break the siege in Gaza in 2010. This verdict led to meaningful progress in terms of 3025 implementation, alongside vast public discourse regarding women's representation in foreign affairs and security issues. Nevertheless, we acknowledge that the legal tool can carry out 3025 principles in all other complexities. For example, in petition to the Supreme Court, it is not strategically wise to demand diverse representation that might be interpreted as a vague concept. Instead, we have realized that we need to choose one marginalized group, our women, ultra-Orthodox women, etc., in order to raise the prospect that the court will intervene. However, the choices that we have to make are in a way on the contrary to our definition of diversity. Moreover, it seems that it is not our mandate to choose one group over another. Of course, the relevant assumption is not to avoid the legal arena. It is a very important arena and still an effective one. However, in order to carry out all the principles of 3025, including the relevant tools, implementing a national action plan is the relevant strategy for us. Challenge number 4. Confronting the definition. Are we advancing agenda or representation of women? One of our difficulties while advancing women's representation, even a diverse one, is the fact that it doesn't necessarily mean that we advance what we defined as a feminist agenda or as a pro-peace agenda. In fact, since the reality is that we have a right-wing government, advancing women that are more diverse will probably not lead to a dramatic change at the table in terms of more pragmatic points of view. This dilemma has been expressed in the sharpest way while tackling the peace process teams in the last few years. However, we believe that diverse representation is a value that we need to advance. Nevertheless, we need to change the reality that forces us to choose what to advance. In fact, we can advance both. For example, parallel to submission our petition to the Supreme Court in the case of the Turkish flotilla, demanding representation of women, we submitted to the committee a wide gender analysis. In this analysis, we presented the directions that the committee should examine in order to highlight several points of view and specifically in this example to take into account the suffering of the civil society in Gaza and the Israeli-South border. Hence, we don't have to accept the reality that dictates us that we need to choose to advance women over agenda. A similar question arises while trying to choose between radical points of view or mainstream points of view. While formulating the civil action plan among the women's organization, this was a significant dilemma, emphasizing the fact that the feminist agenda is not a monolithic way of thinking. The most complex question that we faced was how to define our declaration regarding the occupation. This question was mainly an ideological question, but also a strategic one. The spirit of the statement would affect our coalition and the prospect that the government would adopt our action plan as a strategy, knowing that a very solid statement would probably cause the government to ignore us. On the contrary, we had to acknowledge the fact that a shallow statement would not represent the opinion of most of us. Eventually, in our action plan, we explicitly called to end occupation, reflecting the fact that this statement was not a consensus. This way of declaration gave us the opportunity to engage the government. Finally, the challenge number 5, which is like all of the challenge, is an ongoing challenge. We didn't solve it, and we still face all of the challenges, especially challenge number 5.